My name is Rusty. Yes, that's my real name. I have no choice. It's on my license. I teach at Fresno State. We've got a BFA program in graphic design, so that's a Bachelor's of Fine Arts. And within that, we have 3 different tracks. We've got a traditional graphic design track, an illustration track, and an interactive multimedia track. So I teach in that track. So mainly I teach web, thank you. I teach web from beginning to advanced, and then I teach some programming. I teach P5. Does anyone know P5? Played around with P5 before? No, it's a really awesome JavaScript. It's made specifically for artists and designers. It's all visual. Have you ever heard of processing? You heard of processing though, right? That's what Arduino's based on. It's basically that. It's basically that. Anyway, that's a different class. This is this class. That's that class. My background is in print design. I was a print designer for a long time, and then I went to Parsons in New York, and I got my MFA in design and technology. So that's where I started coding. I don't even want to say how many years ago. It'll show up in my talk how old I am. So before we talk about CS Grid, we need to go back in time a little bit to understand how we got here. Why is layout on the web so messy and confusing, and we all run to frameworks to take care of it for us? So in the beginning, we had this, right? Absolutely no layout whatsoever. There wasn't even an image tag in the beginning. No layout. You couldn't even center text. You couldn't do anything. Look at the line length on that. It's like, by the time you finish a line and you try to find your way back to the start again, you're lost. You're completely lost. So obviously the people who created HTML had no consideration for layout or design, because they didn't think it would be what it is today. They didn't realize it was going to be our entertainment and our communication and our everything. So it stayed like that for years and years and years. So designers started hacking, and we were desperately trying to come up with some way to visually organize this medium, because this is a communication medium, and that's what designers do, is we organize communication visually. And we figured out at one point that we could take the table element and like hold it hostage and make it do things for us. And I don't know if anyone remembers this, but you take your Photoshop mock-up page, you chop it up into little pieces, and you reassemble it in a table. But the table was never meant to do that. The table was meant to just be a table of data. So this is, this page actually still exists. You can go in there and you can hack into it and turn the tables on and see how, yeah, that was fun. I'm lying, it was not fun. It was not fun at all. It was tedious. The code was awful to read. It was nasty. It was absolute opposite of flexible. So then the float came around. Ooh, the float element was created. The reason it was created was to let text flow around an object, and intended to be like a photo. It was supposed to. That's all it was created for. But designers, again, all hacky-like, they are like, oh my God, we can use this to get 2 things to go side by side and get along together? What? And so we hacked it, and if you can do that, you can create columns. Oh my God, columns. We could create columns. It was so exciting. And this is where we've been for years, this column-based float layout. And a lot of you I know already now, a lot of you are still working in float-based layouts, which is totally fine. But you have to remember, it's still a hack. HTML, CSS was not meant, floats were not meant to do this. And that's why you turn to frameworks, because if you did them yourself, there's complicated math involved, and there's this clear float thing, and like heaven forbid you want 3 columns that have the same height but their content isn't the same. You know, this is why we're turning to frameworks, because they just do all that for us magically. So I've kind of brought you to the current day now. We've been doing this forever. We're still doing it. What's harder than learning a new trick? Is unlearning your old tricks, right? It's really, really hard. And so CSS Grid has been, well, it's a game changer. Let me back up. It's a total game changer. It gives us power, simplicity, and creativity. And there's a lot going on with CSS Grid, and I think that's why people get kind of intimidated by it, because it's really, there's so much there. But it's there so that you have so many options on how to write your code and make it flexible and efficient. But really, the basics of it, you can really get up and running in like very little time. Trust me, I teach this to artists, and they're able to do some small CSS Grid layouts in a week or so. So it is possible, and you're going to do it by the end of this. So first I'm going to explain the basics to give you like an overall mental model of how it works, and then I'll do some demoing. So CSS Grid specification is at level 1, so with possible level 2 coming out. And as you can see, it's highly supported in over 90 browsers at this point. It was made to do layout. Nothing else up until this point was made to do layout. It's made to do layout. So it's time to get on board with it. It really is. So let's say you have a layout in mind, something creative and fantastic, something like this. Yeah, I know, right? Not just 3 columns with 3 things in it and a big header photo. Whoa, something like that on the web? No way, no way. Yeah, that's it. So you want to, so there's a grid, and I'll show you here. We're going to make a grid to put around it, theoretically, and there's your grid. So you design your grid, you decide how many columns and how many rows and how wide you want them to be. And then you get to place elements inside that grid wherever you want. Notice there's some that don't even have stuff in them, and like just random white space on a page that you didn't have to stick a thing in there to get. You get it to, yeah. So the overall box is called the grid container. And then any particular element that you place on it is called a grid item. Okay. Now grid items have to be direct children of the container. They become grid items automatically. They don't have any choice. In this code example, you can see here, we've got a body element. So if we put a grid on that body element, then the header, the main, we've got a header and main. We've got some other stuff inside of there. And then underneath, we've got an aside and a footer. The header, the main, the side, and the footer would all become direct children. And so they would be items that they were now available to you to place on the grid. But the article, the H1, the P, those are grandchildren, great-grandchildren. They are not available to place on the grid, so they stay contained within that main element. So it becomes a really great way to section off large portions of your page and treat each one almost like its own page without it affecting the other parts so much. So some more terminology to throw at you. Any 1x1 area is called a cell. But you can make grid areas that are multiple cells together. They have to be rectangles though. You can't make like an L shape. Not yet, at least. I don't know, maybe in the future, but not yet. We also have, there's some more area. There are also lines between the columns and rows, and these are numbered starting at 1. And this is a different system than you're probably used to if you're using any kind of float-based framework, because if I wanted something to span 3 columns, I'd have to tell it to start at 2 and go to 5 instead of, however, for example, that would be how I would do it. You think in terms of those lines. We also have grid gaps. So this part right here is called the grid gap. And it's kind of like a gutter in the print world. We have a gutter, so like newspapers and magazines, the space between. It's, the default is 0, so you have to define it if you want one. One thing about grid is there's this concept about explicit versus an implicit. As you learn grid, you're going to hear those words a lot. You can explicitly define the size and number of rows of your columns, the size of your columns and rows, or you could do nothing and the browser will sort of figure it out for you. You can explicitly place certain items into the grid by telling it exactly where you want, or you could say nothing and the browser is going to put all the grid item elements in there according to its item placement algorithm. And maybe you want that, maybe you don't. It can come in handy. It just kind of starts putting them in there row by row. Here's an example of that in action. This is just a simple grid. And I'll clue you into something really cool about this. There are no media queries here. None. No media queries. Right? How many would you have to write? In Bootstrap. Exactly. No, absolutely no media queries. But you're probably saying, well, but what all those photos are the same height and width, like what if they were different? Well, it can also do, here's the code for it. I was going to show you that. So a bunch of images inside of a container. Remember, they have to be direct children. And this is the code that did that one with the spices. That's it. That's it. And actually, a lot of that you don't even need. It's just basically, this is the engine right here, 2 lines that's running that example that I just showed. So again, this was made to do this. We're not hacking anything anymore. It was made to make this happen. So now the other example of multiple different size images right here. Again, no media queries. No JavaScript, just CSS Grid. So what it's really good at is you can use it all over the place. You can have grids inside of grids inside of grids. I prefer it to, I really like the way it just sections up your page for you. So you can have a header section and an aside section and a main section, and you can even take those and move them around. You can add media queries to move them around to create wonderful responsive stuff really easily. You can, at a breakpoint, you could take something from the top and stick it down to the bottom. They don't have to be in the order that they are in the HTML to change any of that. You hardly touch the HTML at all. So I would say to some of you who are using frameworks is that you don't need the framework so much anymore, do you? You still might want all those elements, and you could get UI kits to give you all the little pieces that you need. But a lot of the reason we depend on frameworks is because, like I said, they handle all those annoying floats, because floats are hacked. So we're not hacking anymore. We're doing it right. So I think at this point, I'm going to demo the code, if that's okay. And I've got a couple like little extra code pen exercises for you guys. Sound good? Okay. So let's see. Let me go over. Whoa, this is tiny. Let me arrange my. Oh, you can't even see that. Okay, we'll deal with this. Yeah, maybe lights. Thank you. I'll increase the size. Better? Okay, all right. So to create a grid, we first need to tell the browser that it's a grid, and then we need to define all the rows and columns. So here we have, you can see we've got 12 divs, and then over here we've got 12 boxes, and they're wrapped inside of a grid container parent element. So the first thing we need to do is tell it, hey, this is a grid. So we're gonna, here in the grid container class, I'm gonna say display grid. Okay, I'm gonna save and refresh, and we see nothing's happened, but that we haven't defined any columns yet. By default, you get one column. So, but to show you, to prove that it's actually working, I'm in Firefox. Firefox has the best dev tools for seeing the grid, inspecting the grid. You can see it in Chrome, but Firefox has a few more features. So you can see down here, it recognizes the grid, and I can go up and down right there. Let me turn these off. So we're going to use a property to create this column. So we use a property called grid template rows, and I'm going to give it two values: 200 pixels, 100 pixels. It's kind of tempting to say grid. Oh, did I say rows? I meant columns. It's tempting to say grid template columns 3. Give me 3 columns, but you got to tell it how wide you want those columns to be. So you're going to give it one value for every column that you want. So I'm going to say 200 pixels, 100 pixels. I'm going to say save, and I go over here and refresh, and boom, I get 2 columns. And it's putting, I've got 2 columns, so it's putting 2 elements inside of each one. So this is an example of implicit, like I was talking about implicit, explicit. The browser is implicitly creating rows that I haven't created yet. Because it's got to put those things somewhere. They're not going to just disappear on you. So to define some rows, we're going to use the property grid template rows. And let's do 200 pixels and 50. And save. I'll go over here, reload, and that's what we got. So the top one here is 200, then 50, then 100. And again, these rows, I didn't ask for them, but they're being created because again, the browser's got to put that stuff somewhere. So it thinks it's doing me a favor, and usually, sometimes just the default is just all you need. Let's see. I told you before we can make a gap, so we can say grid gap. We'll say 10 pixels. Save. Reload, and there you go. And you can also be specific about whether you want a horizontal or a vertical gap. So you can grid column. You can make this gap really big. You can make really, not everything has to look the same anymore. It's so exciting. It's going to be a revolution. So there you can see I just have the horizontal, when we say row gap, we're going to get something like that. So we can space things out that way. I'm going to set it back to there. All right. So with CSS Grid, we have a new unit of measurement that was created just for Grid, and it's called an FR. And an FR stands for Fractional Unit. So what the FR does is it allocates any free space that's left over, and it allocates it up to however many FRs you want. It divides it evenly as long as there's space left over. So let me show you how that works. So I'm going to say 1 FR, 100 pixels, 1 FR, save, and go over here, refresh. So I've got my 100 pixels, and then it's kind of like margins auto in a way, but even cooler because you can do like 3FR and 2FR and create sort of ratios like that, I'll show you. And you can see that the 100 pixels stay the same and the rest of them space divide up the space evenly. But let's say I did something like 1FR, 2FR, save. And now the 2FR is twice as big as the 1FR. So it's like 2 parts this to 1. It's like when you're making rice, you know, it's like 2 parts water to 1 part rice. It doesn't really matter how much water or rice, it's just 2 to 1, that sort of thing. So you could do all sorts of different kinds of ratios to make your designs work. And we could also do this with the height of rows. So, let's see. Grid, template, rows. What? Oh, I already typed that, sorry. 2FR, 1FR, 2FR, 1FR, 3FR. Okay, save. Okay, so I've got 2FR up at the top, 1FR, and 3FR. And now notice we still have this row down here. Its height is just based on its content. It's just normal, like normal document flow. But you can see, and the FR, we haven't just defined an actual height for this. So it's just, the FR is just like the size of the content, and then the other two sort of base themselves on the size of that one that's just content. But let's add a height to it, and then you can see a little bit better. Height, H, reload. Okay, so now you can see a little bit better. This is still just sitting out there. I haven't given it any height, so it's just whatever's content is. And then the rest divide up like 1 part this, 2 parts that, 3 parts that. Kind of get any questions so far? Does it make a little more sense? So it's really cool. They create a whole new unit of measurement in the universe just for grid. If you have multiple columns of the same width, you don't have to type them over and over again. There's a repeat value. So I'm going to say repeat. No, not that. For 125 pixels, and save, and then I get, you know, and you can do as many as you want there. You can also repeat different widths of pixels, different widths of columns. So, like for example, I could say repeat twice these 2 different sizes. So repeat twice 70, and then separate them by a space. So when you're making columns, it always has to be separated by a space. So I'm going to say 2, and we're going to do 70 pixels and 1 FR, save here. So there you go. So I can do groups of them, as many as I want to get the job done. So that one's, the 70 is going to stay at 70, and then the 1FR is always going to expand to take up the remaining space on the page.
Can you nest the grids?
Absolutely, it's so much fun. But then it becomes a little bit weird because it's a grid item and a grid at the same time, but you totally can. Absolutely, yeah. You can make tiny grids, you can make really big grids. You can make a grid when you don't even need a grid. My students do it all the time. All right, so let me jump over here. So now we're going to take a look at how to move items around in the grid. So we've just made the columns, and the items are just automatically moving in by default. So how do we move them around? Because the cool thing is, the stuff in the grid, they don't have to be in the same order that they are in the HTML. And they don't have to take up just one cell. We can place them directly into any grid cell we want, but we got to specify the location. And for that, we use the line numbers I showed you earlier, but I can turn them on in the DevTools here. So starting at line 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 going down. So the first property I'm going to use, I'm going to turn this off there to turn this off in general. The first one we're going to use is grid column start and then grid column end. So grid column start. I'm targeting item 4. I'm going to start it at 2. I'm going to save this and I'm going to reload. And okay, so now you can see 4 moved over to line 2. It's going to go back and find a spot where it doesn't go forward, it's going to go back, and then it leaves the spaces in front of it empty. You might want that or you might not. If you don't want that, you can use the property called Grid Autoflow. And we'll set it to dense. Yeah, and then it goes back and it backfills all those with whatever it can find. The next one, if it can find a space for it, it sticks it in there. There's a lot of automatic assumption with grids. That can be a little bit tricky at first, but it's not so bad. It's really trying to help you out in the end. But this is kind of how that one layout I showed with the photos in the woods with the differing dimensions, that's definitely using dense. So it's looking for spaces to put everything. It's pretty intelligent. Now we're going to use grid column end to make that one span across 2 columns. So grid column and I'm going to say line 4. There you go. So now number 4 is spanning across 2 lines. I could also say I can shortcut this down to one statement if I want to. I could say grid column, and instead of 2 lines, it's 1 grid column. And you separate them with a slash, so 2/4, and that's going to do the same thing. So it's just 1 line of code. And you can also say, which I kind of like to do, is instead of saying the exact line, I say span 2 or span 3. It just kind of makes more sense to me. So I'm saying start at line 2 and span 2 columns. And again, no change. It's the same. So lots of different ways to write your code with grid, a lot. We could do this with rows as well. Grid, row, and I'm going to say 3, span 2. So now you can see how you can start to take up really big areas of your grid. One mistake a lot of people make, it's not a mistake, it's just unnecessary, is when you're coming from like a float-based thing where you always have 12 columns, people make, oh, I'm going to make a 12-column grid. I'm going to 12, and you don't have to. You can make it any size you want. You could have a big column over here and a little column over here. It doesn't have to be just 12 grids and 12 columns anymore. So make it as easy for yourself as possible, for sure. And now, if you only tell the browser which row or which column, then it's going to find the next available space for the item. But if you tell it, this is the whole explicit thing, if you tell it exactly which row and exactly which column and where to start and where to end, it's going to do exactly as you say, even if the items overlap. So you can get things to overlap on each other, which was a really big pain in the butt before, right? If you wanted 2 things to be on top of each other, you want something in the background, you'd have to like position absolute it, or you could go crazy with negative margins, whatever floats your boat. But grid makes it really, really easy. As long as you tell them, both explicitly tell them to be in the same spot, they'll be in the same spot. And then you can use z-index to make it go up or down, or stacking order like that. I can show you. Let's do that. So on item 7 here, it's a grid column, 1, span 3, grid row 2, span 2, save. Yeah, so see they're overlapping and they're perfectly happy doing it. This is really fun because you can, a lot of my students always want like big backgrounds that are made out of letters and numbers and stuff. So you can just explicitly tell it to be the entire grid container and you have an entire background because you just told it to take up every row and column and it just sticks back there and it works beautifully. Like, so you have a background pattern that's like not an image and you can customize it and it's really cool. And you can also like, we have the shortcut here for grid column, row, start, everything. There's also a thing called grid area where you can shortcut all of this into just one line. So grid column area, it goes something like this. So the first one, and you can look this out, the first one is where the row starts, the second one's where the column start. Third one's where the row ends, and the last one's where the column ends. And this shouldn't change. I hope I put it on the right one. Okay, I put it on the wrong one. But trust me, it works. I think they're on top of each other now. I did it for the same. Yeah, okay, well, oops. Okay. Next, I want to show you autofill. This property is really useful for making a responsive layout, like I was showing you before, where you know you need variable amounts of columns. So here I've got again a bunch of divs and containers. So it's like if you're going to make a photo gallery where everything's the same width, but you don't know how many columns you're going to need because you don't know how wide the viewport is. This is how you do that. Basically what I was showing you before. So instead of repeat, on here, I'm going to say autofill, and I'm going to say, what was I doing? 150 pixels. So basically, it's making as many columns as many times as. Oh, okay. As many times as it can fit, 150 pixels, and it'll just keep making columns. So you can see here, come on. So no media queries, it just does it automatically. Kind of like floats do in a way, but this is so much better. But notice it doesn't go all the way to the end of the container. You may or may not want that. Let's say you don't want it. We can fix that with a really cool little value thingy called min-max, where you tell it, I want the column to be a minimum of this, but a maximum of this, and it just sort of works it out for you. So min, max, and then in parentheses, I'm gonna say minimum of 150 pixels and a maximum of 1 FR. And so now we get that nice, stretchy, responsive design. Again, no media queries. One line of code did that right there.
That's great.
I know, right? It's beautiful. Makes me want to cry. All right, I want to show you now grid template areas. And I'm getting into stuff that I didn't even, like grid template areas is really cool. I'm going to show you now, but I didn't even learn this when I first started. All I did was just the grid template, the columns and the rows, and you can do so much with just that. So I'm showing you some more advanced stuff, but trust me, you can get up and running with very little code. But I want to show you some of the really, really, really cool stuff. So grid template areas, allows us to give individual cells names. We can name them and then place them by name in the different sections. So we're starting out, we got 3 columns, and we're going to use the property grid template areas. Did I spell that right? Template areas. And so you don't have to name all the cells, so we're just going to name a couple right now. And I like to break it down on another line. For each row, you have a set of quotation marks. And then inside of it, you give it starts at the upper left, and you just start giving it names divided by space. So up here, I'm going to say apple, orange. Okay, and that's just one row and just two items. I'm going to say save. And we're not going to see anything over here because it's just information for the browser, but if I turn on the dev tools over here and I say display area names, did I not save? Did I not reload? Template. Did I spell template right? There is period. Oh, did I not do that? Oh, crap. Well, it's supposed to show apple right here and orange right here. And why am I getting, oh, I never switched the example. Oops. That's why. Wrong tab. Okay. Reload. There we go. Apple, orange. It's showing the, so it had the browser knows. Obviously, that's going to be invisible, but yeah. So let me give it a few more rows. And I'm going to say banana, banana. I'm going to say mango, save, reload, and I have apple, orange, banana. I gave banana, I put banana twice for a reason. I'll show you why in a second. But here we get, we get to the interesting part where we get to stick something in those. So I'm going to take item 3, and I'm going to say grid area, and all I have to say is mango. Now 3 is in mango. So imagine this with a larger layout where you've got a header area and a main and a footer and a side. When you go to put stuff in those places, you can just call them by name. You don't have to say lines and rows and numbers and everything. So you can just name general areas and move stuff around like that. Let me do another one. I'm going to say line 8, item 8, grid area banana. Okay, and watch what happens here. So it took up that one, now it's spanning across 2. So you could make large sections out of multiple columns as long as they're like contiguous together. I could even do another banana down here. Banana. And it's going to recognize all of the bananas as one section. So you can create lots of different sections like this. Again, you don't need to do this to do a lot of cool stuff with Grid. This is just one of the really extra cool things that it does. Extra super cool. Yeah, so as long as it's a rectangle, just watch if I do one more somewhere else. If I do another banana here, the whole thing breaks down, so careful with that. It's gotta be a rectangle. Sorry, no triangles or trapezoids, or maybe they'll change that at some point, but that's the rule. Them's the rules. Questions? Anything? You ready to play with it? Did you bring your laptops? Some of you. Oh, you don't get to play? It's a coding workshop. All right. Well, the rest of you might be able to play it on your phone. You can do it on your phone. Okay, so I set up a couple example, sort of little exercises for you to try. If you go to here, this is a page I set up. Generate.design/Devfest 2019, and gotta take a picture because I'm taking it down. It's this right here. So what I've got going on here is like some screenshots, and there's this code pin to start you off. A code pin, come on. It's got the grid and everything. Come on, there we go. There's some styles down here just so you can see the boxes. You can totally ignore those. And I started you out with a grid and a grid gap. And so your objective is to first divvy it up into columns and then place those items where they need to be to sort of replicate those, the images here. And if you want an extra challenge, I put an extra one down here for exercise 4. This is meant to show like the power of it when you mix it with media queries. Like I said before, you can take an item that's up here and stick it anywhere else when you hit a breakpoint. So this is a really good example of two different breakpoints for a layout, and the code pin starts out like this. So it's basically in mobile mode first, and then I've got the breakpoints down here, so you just have to change the grid columns and grid rows to go where they need to go at the medium and the large breakpoints. If you want an extra challenge, that's what I'm trying. If you don't want to code at all, I've got something fun for you to do. Down here in resources, I've got a bunch of helpful things here. There's a game called CSS Grid Garden. It's pretty cool if it comes up here. So you get to water the carrots, basically. So this whole garden they made into a grid, and you can see they use percentages. Okay, in this they use You can use anything to determine your columns, to define them. I used FRs. Percentages you could use. But I've read some things that they kind of break down at some point. I can't remember why, but they work here. So you just need to get the water over to the carrots. So like for this example, I need to get the water over to, let's see, what is it? This is line 1, line 2, line 3. I need to get it over to line 3. So I'm gonna type grid, column, start, 3, yay, and I'm a good gardener. And then the next one, you gotta poison the weeds, and then it gets more and more complicated. And there's prompts up here, so you don't have to remember anything I said because it's going to teach you up here too. So, so you can play with that. That's a really good way to learn. There's one called Flexbox Froggy that teaches you how to. It's really cute. You want to see? Where is he? You played Flexbox Froggy?
Yeah.
Flexbox Froggy is awesome. I kind of like it. Do you really? Oh wait, what happened? Where'd it go? That's weird. Okay, didn't do that yesterday. What questions do you have about this? Like, can you envision yourself using this in your current workflow? Do you think it's going to take a major upheaval?
I can definitely visualize what we're using it.
I think you've got to convince people that it's the way to go, because it.
Future products going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to figure if you've done. Ah, jeez. Gross. Yeah. I'm gonna go get this disinfected. Yeah, I understand. Like I said, it's really hard to stop with your own system. But I really think this is going to revolutionize everything, because it just gets rid of so much stuff that you just you don't need all those big frameworks anymore. Yeah.
So much less code.
Yeah, it's so much less code. And it's easy to understand. You can just read the code. There's so much less HTML because you don't need all those divs to make columns and rows the way they used to. And if you're asking, if your question is about like Flexbox, when would you use, this is a common question, like when would you use Flexbox and when would you use Grid? And the answer is, I don't know, it depends. Actually, they were made to work together. So there is no right or wrong answer to that. So I think in general, broad brush terms, Grid is really good at, basically Flexbox is a one-dimensional thing, so it's good at making like long rows and columns of things, but Grid is two-dimensional. You've got this X and this Y axis that you can work with. So Grid is really good at the major parts of the layout, and Flexbox is really good for lining things up inside of them. And sometimes you could do the exact same thing in Flexbox as Grid, and so is whatever gets the job done. There's always 5 different ways to do it. Just you don't have to use floats anymore. So yeah. So I hope you enjoy it. Yeah, try it with like a small project to begin with. And then you'll realize how quick you can do it. So try these exercises and play the Grid game, and I'm happy to answer any questions or come over and look at anything. I thought there would be more laptops, but that's okay. I can't go anywhere with mine. It's like a big telephone, cell phone, I should say. Any other questions? Well, thank you for listening to me. I really appreciate it. Good.
Are you aware of the current status of subgrid?
No, I'm not. Do you? Do you know?
I was hoping you would.
I don't. I meant to look that up last night and I went to sleep.
I know that it's been talked about in the
Yeah.
past. It would be helpful to not have to keep recreating the grid.
Yeah, and then you could have the grids sort of talk to each other so you
Yeah.
could line things up.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a really good question. Let's Google it. Subgrids. I also put a link to a really good guide. It's if you just Google CSS Grid guide, you're gonna get this. It's CSS Tricks has it, and it's got all the properties with. There's some properties I haven't touched on that you should be aware of. You know how you can in Flexbox justify content, align items. You can do that in Grid too. So like down here, justify self, it determines where in the cell the thing gets stuck to. So stretch, align self, align. There's all that to play with too. So there's, like I said, there's so much to it, but you really only need a little bit to get started.
Is there ever a time where you would even consider using Bootstrap or over CSS Grid and Flexbox, or?
Only if I've already started the project on Bootstrap. You know what I like about like Foundation lets you just grab individual can you do this with Bootstrap? Foundation, you go to their site and you can just grab a few different components. Like if I just want like a light box or something, I can just grab that one little thing and I don't have to take on the entire thing. So I do that a lot.
In Bootstrap, I think you can configure it now to where you
Yeah.
get the aspects you want. Or in like a framework like React, I just structure out just the parts of Bootstrap that I want. That way I can take advantage of the drop-down nav and the buttons.
Yeah.
But I don't have to do any kind of layout. I don't
Right.
know about columns or anything.
I think that's the way we're gonna go.
Yeah.
I think that's how it's gonna go. You just get the little pieces you need, and then you can just put them wherever you want now. You don't need any the floats. So, all right. If my students can do it, you can do it. Trust me. They're artists. Thank you again. Thank you.